San Francisco that I've been speaking about this exhibit. She told me that it was just a wonderful exhibit. She said that she had run into it at the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco. I asked her for some of her thoughts about it. She said, well, I'm not sure I can speak to the significance of the images to the United States audience. However, I can tell you how I felt. The exhibit had enormous appeal for me. Put in context, I'd just come from yet another attempt to appreciate the paintings of Rothko, Rauschenberg, Pollock, and the like. And as has been the case with each previous attempt, was left feeling curiously flat. As always, I found myself wondering, what don't I get here? And if I have to ask that question, the next question is, then what am I doing here? When I stumbled across the Mexico exhibit, like someone switching on the light, my emotional experience came to life. My imagination ignited. I was experiencing the time travel quality of photography that delivers you to a moment occurring 100 years ago. What magic. I wondered about these people's lives, their work, their relationships. Would I fit in? Would I love it, hate it? And what about the art in those masks the Mexican wrestlers wear? Now that's some painting. Oh my, what a rich and rewarding experience. Well, this really speaks to the capacity of photography to connect to people, particularly what has come to be referred to as documentary photography. It's an enormously approachable medium. And particularly so because there is such a powerful connection between the object of a photograph, between the photograph and the original object. Because of that, when we see a photograph of an object, a person, a thing, we believe it. There's a great perception of truth and believability. And I thought what I might do this evening is to give you just a little overview of how the evolution of documentary work took place. So here we are. It's 2012, right? And photography was invented when? Joe told us, 1839, right? 175 years ago, approximately. It didn't take long. Well, in fact, it was in the 1840s that a fellow in London started using photographs to do a documentary project about the people of London. In fact, it was Henry Mayhew. He published the results of a large investigation into London street life. This is in the 1840s. And how did he use photography? Well, they used daguerreotype portraits of people in the normal situation, and they did engravings from them to illustrate this study. The daguerreotypes were not very good, but think about it. Photographs of something real that's being portrayed in the public press within just a few years after the invention of the medium of photography. Now, in America, in the United States in the 1860s, the daguerreotype had come on. People loved having their portraits taken because it had never been available before. If you were a middle-class worker, you'd never have the chance to have a portrait. It just wasn't done. Portraits were reserved for people that could afford painters to do, these trophies. Photography changed that. It made it possible, as Sharon talked about. Sharon, right? Shannon, sorry. As Shannon talked about, that it made it possible, as we saw in Mexico, for the common person to get a picture of themselves. Okay? And the daguerreotypes and later processes made that possible. But in the 1860s, Matthew Brady, who had been doing portraits, started doing photographs from American Civil War battlefields. Go out, do large photographs. I think I think they were doing albumin prints by then, weren't they? So there was large prints for large negatives. They weren't enlargements, they were just big cameras, big negatives of the battlefield. Still, I mean, while half-tone reproduction was starting to be developed, that really wasn't a good way to show these pictures. So what did they do? They put these photographs in Matthew Brady's studio, galleries, so that people could come in and see what these battlefields looked like. And all of a sudden, we saw images expressing what was going on and the consequences of war. After the war, one of Matthew Brady's photographers, Timothy O'Sullivan, took his huge camera out to the American West, started photographing the American landscape, the frontier. He even accompanied the John Wesley Powell expedition down the Colorado River. Huge cameras, incredibly difficult to do. They went out and did it to show the world what it looked like. As the 19th century came to an end, technology made photography more portable and more accessible to more photographers. Little Kodak Brownie, with its advertising slogan, "You snap the shutter and we do the rest." You get a camera that was preloaded with a huge roll of film that would take 100 pictures. When you were done with it, you send it into Kodak, you process it, make prints and everything, send it back to you. All of a sudden, anybody can be a photographer. It hasn't changed yet, has it? You buy a camera, you're a photographer. You buy a piano, you own a piano. Anyway, photographers appreciate that. Anyway, most of the images that were done were simply the ephemera of an age. But many were certainly documentary in nature. A breed of photographer arose who had a compelling interest in how society was put together and what it looked like, blended with a powerful sense of compassionate justice. Jacob Riis was a police reporter in New York in the 1880s when he began his personal campaign to expose the misery of the underprivileged living within the crime-infested slums of the Lower East Side. He soon found that the printed word was not sufficiently convincing. And so he turned to photography, publishing How the Other Half Lives in 1890. Riis wanted to portray his subjects in their tenement housing, which were miserably lit. So he experimented with a brand new technology called flash powder that would fill a tray with this ignitable powder, and when triggered with a little flash and the shutter went off, big explosion of light, and he was able to photograph inside the interior of these tenements. And what did it do? It changed how people saw the poor in New York. It changed their response to the social conditions of the time. Lewis Hine, and Joe showed you some of his photographs, had been an obscure teacher in a normal school in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. He came to New York to teach at the Agricultural School in 1904. He was completely without photographic experience, but he became a school photographer, and in this way he gained technical expertise. He had a compassionate vision that he maintained throughout his life. His revulsion against the use of children in the early 20th century American workforce, labor force, and his empathy for all those who toil was not based on hearsay, or evidence garnered from books or newspapers. his own experience in a factory, a furniture factory, a bank, a retail store, working 13 hours a day, 6 days a week for a miserable $4 in wages, covered his entire existence and filled him with a passion from which he could never escape. He not only changed the way we saw ourselves and our cultures, but his photographs changed the way we treat one another. Once his photographs of children in the workplace were shown to the United States Congress, could they ignore it anymore? No. They saw it, and they had to acknowledge that it existed. And so the laws began to change. That was in that first decade of this, of the last century. Edward Curtis and others photographed the vanishing North American Indians. Roy Stryker, and as we move on a little bit with the Farm Security Administration, photographed the American Depression, what it looked like. And our consciousness of what informed all those films from the last century. If you were Ilya Kazan doing a picture about Mexico, what did you go to?